In 1848, something happened across the entire civilized world simultaneously that had never happened before in recorded history. France erupted in revolution in February. Within weeks, revolutions ignited in Germany, Austria, Italy, Hungary, and across the German states. 50 countries, the same year, the same months. Historians have puzzled over this for almost 2 centuries. What force could possibly have synchronized the breaking point of so many different cultures, languages, economies, and political systems at the same moment? I've been studying the charts for 40 years, and when I look at 1848, the answer is in the sky. Saturn and Neptune were approaching their conjunction, the same conjunction that fell in 1989 and brought down the Berlin Wall, the same conjunction that arrived in February of 2026 at 0 degrees Aries, and that I need to tell you about right now because you are living inside the same historical force those people in 1848 were living inside. And most people do not understand what that means. I'm Luna Solano. This is why I had to record this today. Not because I want to alarm you, but because after 40 years of watching these cycles play out in real lives, in real people's careers, relationships, health, sense of purpose, and sense of what is possible, I cannot in good conscience let you navigate what is happening in 2026 without the historical context that makes it comprehensible. The mainstream astrology world is talking about Saturn-Neptune in Aries. Very few people are talking about what it means that this conjunction happened at 0 degrees, at the Aries Point, the world point, the coordinate that ancient astrologers specifically identified as the place where what happens in the heavens lands most directly in collective human life. That is the conversation I'm here to have with you today. If you've been feeling that something fundamental has shifted in the architecture of your life, not dramatically, not in the form of a crisis necessarily, but in the form of a deep structural renegotiation of what is real and what is solid and what can actually be trusted, you are not imagining it. The stars confirm exactly what you've been sensing, and by the time I'm done today, you will understand what has happened, what it means across the sweep of human history, what it is specifically asking of you, and what you can do practically, concretely, to navigate this extraordinary moment in a way that serves your life rather than simply happening to it. Before we go any further, if this kind of deep, historical, research-driven astrology is what you've been searching for, please subscribe. I go further than the mainstream channels. I trace these cycles back through the centuries. And this community, the people who show up here wanting to understand rather than simply survive, is the reason I keep doing this work. Let me take you into the historical record, not for academic interest, but because the historical record is our most reliable guide to what a given planetary configuration actually does in human life. And Saturn and Neptune have left a very clear record. The first thing to understand is the nature of the Saturn-Neptune cycle itself. These 2 planets meet approximately every 36 years. Saturn is the architect, the principle of structure, of form, of solid material reality. Think of Saturn as the master builder, the one who insists on real foundations, who knows that anything worth having must be built on ground that actually holds. Neptune is the dissolver, the principle of the infinite, of the formless, of what transcends structure. Think of Neptune as the ocean. It has no shape of its own. It takes the shape of whatever contains it, and given enough time and enough tidal motion, it will reshape even the hardest rock. When Saturn and Neptune meet, these 2 radically different principles, the builder and the ocean, sit at the same degree of the sky. And what happens is a profound, often disorienting renegotiation of what is genuinely structural and what has merely been sustained by accumulated belief. In 1989, Saturn and Neptune met in Capricorn, the sign of institutions, of established power, of the structures that govern collective life. The result was immediate and historic. The Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. The Soviet Union began its dissolution, Apartheid in South Africa entered its final phase. Within 2 years, the entire political map of Eastern Europe had been redrawn, and in the lives of individuals living through that time, the pattern I observed in chart after chart was the same, something that had appeared solid, a career structure, a relationship framework, a belief system, an identity, revealed itself as having been maintained by assumption rather than genuine integrity. The wall didn't fall only in Berlin, it fell in people's inner lives. In 1952 to 1953, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction occurred in Libra, the sign of partnerships, agreements, and the structures that govern relationships between parties. That period saw the end of the Korean War and the beginning of the negotiations that would shape the Cold War balance of power for the next 4 decades. The formal structure of collective security, the architecture of international agreements, was being renegotiated at its foundations. And in 1917, Saturn and Neptune met in Leo, the sign of sovereign power, of leadership, of the individual who embodies collective authority. That conjunction year saw the Russian Revolution, the entry of the United States into World War I, and the effective end of the century-long age of European monarchy. The structure of who held power and why it was legitimate, the very architecture of governance, dissolved and was rebuilt in an entirely new form. Do you see the pattern? Every 36 years, in whichever sign the conjunction falls, the structures associated with that sign's domain reveal the gap between their apparent solidity and their actual foundation. What was believed to be permanent turns out to have been conditional. What was maintained by habit and assumption and the accumulated weight of tradition turns out to be genuinely renegotiable. And something new, something that comes from a deeper source of reality than the structure it replaces, begins to emerge. Now, here is what makes 2026 categorically different from every previous Saturn-Neptune conjunction in modern astrological history, and this is the part that gives me chills every time I think about it. On February 20th, 2026, Saturn and Neptune did not meet in a particular sign's middle degrees, where the qualities of that sign are most established and mature. They met at 0 degrees and 52 minutes of Aries, at the very first breath of the first sign, at what the ancient astrologers called the Aries Point, the world point, the degree of the Zodiac, where the personal and the collective are most directly interconnected, where what happens in an individual life most legibly reflects what is happening in the world, and where what happens in the world most directly lands in individual lives. This hasn't happened since 1702 and 1703. I want to let that number register. Not 1989, not 1952, not 1917, 1702, 324 years ago. The last time Saturn and Neptune met at 0 degrees Aries, the War of Spanish Succession was rewriting the map of Europe, questioning which claims to power were actually legitimate, which inheritances of authority were genuine, and which were maintained purely by historical inertia. And in Japan that same year, the 47 Ronin incident crystallized a question that still resonates across cultures. What do you do when the structure that gave your loyalty its meaning has dissolved? How do you maintain integrity and purpose when the framework that defined those terms is gone? These are not ancient questions. They are your questions right now in 2026. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the world point is asking, in the most direct and unavoidable way this celestial configuration can ask, which structures in your life are genuinely solid? Which claims to permanence in your work, your relationships, your identity, your sense of security are backed by actual integrity, and which have been maintained by accumulated assumption, by the comfortable fiction that because something has been in place for a long time, it will continue to be in place, by the human gift for not looking too closely at cracks in the foundation. The Sabian symbol for 0 to 1 degree of Aries, the exact degree of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, is one I have returned to again and again in the weeks since this conjunction was exact. because it is so precise in what it is communicating. A woman has risen out of the ocean. A seal is embracing her. Read that image again and let it work on you. A woman who was in the ocean, in the deep, the formless, the place where things exist in potential rather than in form, has risen, has surfaced, has come into the air, into visibility, into the world above the waterline. And the seal, the creature that lives with equal ease in the water and on the land, the creature that bridges the two worlds, is embracing her, not threatening, not interrogating, welcoming, saying, "You belong here. You are ready for the air. What was submerged in you is ready to be known." This is the most beautiful possible description of what Saturn-Neptune at the world point offers. The dissolution that Neptune brings is not destruction. It is the dissolving of the boundary between the world below the surface and the world above it. Between what has been forming in the deep places of your life, in the unconscious, in the unexpressed, in the not yet formed, and what can now be brought into the air, into the light, into visibility and form. Saturn is here to give it form. Neptune dissolved the barrier between the depths and the surface. Saturn will build in the space that dissolution created. And what gets built, what emerges from the ocean into the seal's embrace, is something more genuinely real than what the old structure ever was. Let me bring you into the specific mechanisms of this conjunction, because I want to show you not just what it means in the abstract, but exactly what it is doing to the architecture of your daily life. Saturn, since it entered Aries in late 2025, has been doing what Saturn always does, testing the structural integrity of whatever it touches. In Aries, the sign of the self, of identity, of the initiating principle, Saturn is testing the structural integrity of your sense of who you are and what you are here to do. Are your goals actually yours? Is the identity you've been operating from genuinely constructed from your actual values, your actual capacities, your actual desires? Or has it been built over the years to satisfy the expectations of people and systems outside yourself? Saturn in Aries does not ask this question kindly. It asks it by making what is structurally unsound feel unstable, by creating the friction between what you've been building toward and what you actually need to be building toward. Neptune, arriving at the same degree as Saturn on February 20th, added its dissolving quality to that structural test. The illusions that have been sustaining the unsound structure, the comfortable stories that have made it feel acceptable to stay in something past its expiration, to maintain an identity that has been outgrown, to keep the wall standing when what is real is already growing on the other side of it. Those illusions became harder to maintain. Neptune is not cruel, but it is thorough. What it dissolves completely. And when it dissolves in conjunction with Saturn at the world point, the dissolution is not subtle. You have felt this. I know you have felt this. Every chart I've looked at this month shows the same pattern, the same quality of ground shifting, of something solid revealing its conditionality, of a story you've been telling yourself, encountering the resistance of what is actually true. That is Saturn-Neptune at 0 Aries. That is the conjunction doing precisely what it has always done in 1989 and 1952, in 1917 and 1848, in 1702, delivered at the highest possible amplitude, because this time it landed at the world point. Stay with me, because I want to give you the 3 specific ways this generational reset is showing up in your personal life, the 3 domains where Saturn-Neptune at 0 Aries is most directly operative. And then I'm going to walk you through the signs and give you the ritual that the ancient astrologers themselves would have recommended for this specific transit. The first domain is what I call the restructuring of what you call security. Saturn and Neptune together, at any degree, always create a renegotiation of what is genuinely secure versus what has felt secure because it was familiar. But at 0 Aries, the first degree of the first sign, the coordinate of the self, at its most initiating and unmediated, this renegotiation happens at the most fundamental level possible, the level of your core sense of what makes you safe. What have you been relying on for your sense of security? What in your finances, your relationships, your living situation, your career, that is based on assumption rather than genuine foundation? The conjunction is asking you to know the difference, not to dismantle everything, but to see clearly which parts of your structure are load-bearing and which are decorative. The signal that this domain is active in your life. You may have experienced, in the weeks surrounding February 20th, an unusual clarity about the actual quality of what you've been relying on. A financial picture that revealed itself more honestly than it had before. A relationship that showed you, in some specific moment, what it was actually built on. A professional structure that felt differently, more conditional, more uncertain, more genuinely in question than it had in years. That clarity is not pessimism. It is the conjunction doing the honest structural assessment that Saturn specializes in, with Neptune removing the comfortable buffer that had been keeping the honest assessment at arm's length. The second domain is what I think of as the emergence of the submerged real calling. This is the woman rising from the ocean, the seal's embrace. In every Saturn-Neptune conjunction I have watched over 40 years, there is a pattern in the people who navigate it most effectively. They do not try to rebuild the structure that dissolved. They listen instead for what has been below the surface trying to become visible, the calling, the direction, the sense of genuine purpose that the old structure was too narrow to contain. Neptune dissolves so that something truer can emerge. Saturn will give it form, but first you have to hear it. In your specific life, the question the conjunction is asking is, what have you been keeping underwater? What direction, what calling, what quality of life have you been not quite allowing yourself to want? Because the existing structure didn't have room for it, because the people whose approval mattered to you didn't understand it because you couldn't yet see how it would work? The Aries energy of this conjunction, the first sign initiating self-determining energy at the world point, is saying that what has been submerged is ready to be above the waterline now, not next year, not when conditions are more favorable. Now, the seal is there. It is ready to embrace what rises. The third domain is the most collective, and I want to name it even though it may feel distant from daily life. The dissolution of collective agreements that were never real. The world point activation of this conjunction means it is not only personal. The structures dissolving are not only individual. What is happening in the world around you, the questioning of institutional authority, the exposure of gaps between what collective structures claim to be and what they actually were, the sense that the rules everyone was playing by may have never been as universal or as solid as they appeared. That is Saturn-Neptune at the Aries Point operating at the collective level, and it will continue operating there, and the personal and the collective will be more directly intertwined in this period than they typically are. What happens in the world is happening for you to notice. What you see dissolving around you holds information about what is being cleared to allow something more genuine to emerge. Now let me speak directly to the three signs most powerfully touched by this Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 Aries. Remember to check your rising sign and your ascendant degree specifically, because the house placement of 0 Aries in your personal chart tells me exactly where this restructuring is most directly operative. For Aries and Aries rising, Saturn and Neptune have been meeting in your first house, the house of identity, of the self, of the body, and of the way you initiate everything in your life. This is the most personal possible placement. The conjunction is restructuring your sense of who you are, your identity architecture, the story you tell about yourself and to others, the direction from which you initiate your life. What this means specifically, something in the way you've been defining yourself is being tested at its foundation, not to destroy it, but to determine what of it is genuinely yours. and what was constructed for reasons that no longer apply. The action for Aries. Identify one quality you have been performing rather than actually living, and make one concrete choice this month that expresses who you actually are instead. For Libra and Libra rising, Saturn and Neptune are meeting in your 7th house, the house of partnerships, contracts, one-on-one relationships, and the agreements that structure your most significant connections. The dissolution happening here is in the architecture of your closest relationships, what they've been based on, what has been assumed rather than genuinely agreed upon, what has been maintained by the comfortable fiction of permanence rather than ongoing genuine choice. The question the conjunction is asking, Libra, in your most significant partnership, romantic, professional, or otherwise, what is the honest conversation about the real terms of the relationship that has not yet been had, not as accusation or ultimatum, as the kind of structural honesty that only makes the relationship more real? The action for Libra. Before April, have one honest conversation about what you actually need in your most significant partnership. For Cancer and Cancer rising, Saturn and Neptune are meeting in your 10th house, the house of career, public life, reputation, and the contribution you make to the world beyond your private life. The conjunction is testing the structural integrity of your professional life, the work you've been doing, the public identity you've been maintaining, the direction your career has been pointed in. Is what you're building in the world genuinely yours? Does it come from who you actually are or from who you've been told you should be? Jupiter is currently in Cancer, in your 1st house, and the tension between Jupiter's expansion of your personal identity and Saturn-Neptune's restructuring of your public life is creating exactly the friction that leads to genuine vocational alignment. The action for Cancer. Identify one way in which your professional life is not yet an honest expression of who you are and make one move, one conversation, one application, one boundary set toward greater alignment. Here is the ritual for this conjunction. Because when a planetary event of this magnitude occurs, a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the world point, an event that has not happened in 300 years, the ritual needs to be appropriate to the scale of what has occurred, not elaborate, but real. The optimal timing is the period from now through the spring equinox on March 20th, when the sun enters Aries and activates 0 degrees, the exact degree of the conjunction, for the first time since Saturn and Neptune met there. This creates a window of approximately 3 weeks during which the conjunction energy is at its most personally accessible. What you need? 3 things: a piece of paper and a pen. Something from the natural world: a stone, a shell, a piece of wood, a dried flower, any natural object that you feel some resonance with, and a candle, any color. Light the candle. Hold the natural object in your hands for a moment. Let it ground you. Let the physical reality of it connect you to what is genuinely material, genuinely solid, genuinely real. This is the Saturn half of the ritual. Then on the paper, write 3 things. The first is a structure in your life, in your security, your identity, your relationships, your career, that the conjunction has revealed as having been maintained by assumption rather than genuine integrity. Name it honestly. 1 sentence. 1. The second thing you write is what you believe has been waiting below the surface of your life. The direction, the calling, the quality of existence, the form of relationship or work or creative life, that the dissolution of the old structure has created space for. What is rising from the ocean in you? What is the seal ready to embrace? 1 sentence, honest, specific. The third thing you write is 1 concrete action, 1 step, 1 decision, 1 conversation, 1 beginning that you are choosing to take before the spring equinox on March 20th in the direction of the second thing, not the whole journey. 1 step. Saturn builds 1 stone at a time. Fold the paper and place it under the natural object. Let the candle burn for as long as feels right.
then keep the natural object somewhere you can see it, on a windowsill, on a desk, somewhere in your daily visual field, as a physical anchor of the choice you've made.
The affirmation for this conjunction: to speak in the morning with intention. I release what was held by assumption. I build on what is actually real. I welcome what has been waiting to rise. What I most want you to carry from today: you are living inside a civilizational scale restructuring that has not happened at this amplitude in over 300 years. The structures dissolving around you and within you are dissolving because they were never as solid as they appeared. And what is emerging from the dissolution, the woman rising from the ocean, is something more genuinely real. Your disorientation is not pathology. It is an accurate response to something historic, and your capacity to navigate it with awareness, to understand what is happening rather than simply survive it, is one of the most significant advantages you can have in this moment. The generational reset is real. It is already underway, and you are exactly where you need to be to move through it consciously. Tell me in the comments, what structure in your life has the conjunction been testing at its foundation? I want to know what you're seeing. I read every word. Until next time, keep looking up. This is Luna Solano.